Welcome to All Things Photo. I am Jim Goldstein, and with me is
Eric Cheng.
excellent. So in this, our premiere episode, we are going to be talking about the latest Adobe Lightroom, we'll say debacle. I think that people could pretty much sum that up based on the reaction, as well as the latest news and our experience in seeing the Light L16 camera. Well, from what there was anyway. So first up was this whole Lightroom, Adobe Lightroom problem with an upgrade, and that upgrade did not go so well.
That was only, I mean, it's October 19th now. So it was only 10 days ago that this happened, but it feels like it's been a long time.
Yeah, it's
because
been
of the response.
languishing, definitely languishing. And this is for, just to be very specific, it's in relation to Adobe CC 5.21 or 2.1, excuse me, 2015 2.1.
2015, yeah, or Lightroom 6.2.
Yeah. That's correct, 6.21. And so the idea was to, from the Adobe perspective, was to upgrade the import screen and to include some new enhancements, which I don't think they planned for the new enhancement to include system crashes, but that was also included in the mix, at least from the reports anyway.
Yeah, and it, of course, did a few more things like fix bugs and increase camera compatibility with, I don't know, I got a DxO camera and I'm trying that out and it, it supports that. So I sort of upgraded just because I've upgraded more or less blindly with every version of Lightroom. And this is the first one that has ever really surprised me with something new.
Yeah, they actually had, I believe, also dehaze, making it so that it could be a local adjustment.
Instead of just global, right?
That's right. That's right. So, I mean, there's a lot of really great things that were in there. Unfortunately, what got overshadowed was the fact that people were having increased crash frequency and that they were really, I think it's fair to say they were pretty PO'd that the import screen changed and the ability to have a card ejected when they were done importing, and it was very confusing for people. So, I think fast forward just about a week later, and Tom Hogarty at Adobe issued an apology, I believe, on their blog. And then later there was news that that they would be reverting the import screen.
Right. So this was, well, first they issued a fix, right? I mean, a fix for the crash issues, versions 6.2.1 or
that's correct.
Yeah, and although that has not solved the problem for me. I mean, mine's not crashing anymore, but it's hanging. So, for example, I quit and I think I've quit. And then when I shut my machine down, it doesn't shut down because Lightroom's still running in the background and needs to be force quit. So that's been new, unfortunately, and has not been fixed. But I force quit it and just hope that it doesn't corrupt the database. That's not a great solution, but that's what I've been doing.
That is definitely the big question. I think that this is the one instance where Adobe Lightroom has the team, I don't know if it's the team or I'll just say the software, has faltered. What I was surprised about was how harsh the reaction was by all the photographers that I was following online. Did you have like a similar experience? Was just like, did you see this huge backlash happening?
Yeah, I mean, first, do you want to show the screen here? If I take a picture here and put it in, we should probably show it because there are probably, there's some people that just haven't seen it. Probably won't have as much context. Although I would assume most people listening to this use Lightroom.
By the time it airs, I'm sure most people will have seen it. But we can definitely include a link in the show notes as well.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, actually, I have to, let me just show this because it just came up for me and I have to laugh every time. Okay, so this is my import screen. I don't know if you can see it there.
I can.
And it's on a 4K monitor, and it's giant. It goes full screen, and I've taken one picture which is in the corner, and then there's all the stuff on the right hand side which is almost hidden. I mean, I have to look pretty hard to find all of the settings. So I think in addition to removing some things that people use on a daily basis, it just feels harder to use. I mean, it actually takes me, I don't know, it takes an additional 10 or 15 seconds every time, which is not much, but I import photos sort of all the time. So I guess we don't need to talk about why people don't like it, because it's pretty clear that people just didn't like it. And
yeah, so there's a couple things. One is the thing that I found really intriguing about this was that people had such a harsh reaction to it. And then also, I think what was the impetus for Adobe to make these changes, which I think is really telling. And I think people will have less of a harsh reaction to future changes if they keep this in mind. I don't know if that's true or not, but I guess all companies that, from my perspective, maybe I don't know if your outlook is the same, but it seems like in 2012 we hit this peak in fervor over digital photography. The 5D2 came out and it was gangbusters, and everybody jumped on the bandwagon with new gear and everything else. And now it seems like a lot of the technology companies and a lot of the service companies in the photography space are, especially the ones that are public, are feeling the pinch for additional growth. And they're coming off of this peak and it's kind of coming down a little bit, and they're looking to expand their market. So this import screen clearly is an angle to try to make it easier for non-professionals to start using Lightroom. And I think it kind of blew up in their face.
yeah, and I'm really sensitive to that because I came from Aperture, and I came from Aperture because, well, first of all, it corrupted my whole database, which is when I really dumped it. But that was sort of the precursor to them Apple just dumping the product altogether. So I actually left Apple software in general, except for Mac, for OS 10, which I love. But I'm worried about it, and I don't use any of the Apple editing tools as a result, because Final Cut Pro, for example, I just don't use, because I don't trust that they'll keep it alive for the long term. So, we saw it happen on the Apple side, and I came to Lightroom because actually I don't like the interface as much as I did Aperture, but it does everything I need it to do, and actually does quite a bit. I mean, it manages my entire library, and I think for most of the people who are complaining, it probably also manages their entire library. And I think some people are probably just, I don't know, I feel like people are forgetting how much Lightroom does well. And, over an import screen, which, yes, is an indicator that they perhaps didn't do the testing that, the user testing during the design phase that they maybe should have. But it's a misstep, and people are threatening to cancel their Creative Cloud subscriptions. I would actually be really interested in knowing what they plan to use once they cancel.
Well, I think that's the funny thing about this, is that everybody is making a big to-do, and Adobe is the 800-pound gorilla. They relatively, relatively speaking, they monopolize the industry, and there's all this integration. So I'm not really sure that people are really going to follow through with what they're saying. And in the reality, the big picture of it is, Adobe and the Lightroom team have hit home run after home run after home run for the most part. And this is really, in my memory, this is their biggest misstep. But it's not a fatal misstep, and I think that's what people are really missing. There's so much that they offer in functionality. It works well 99% of the time, and they have just really devoted themselves to the cause. And, you mentioned Apple, where they kind of backed out of supporting their software, and Adobe has never done that. So it's interesting to me that people were so quick to go negative.
Yeah, and actually, to Adobe's credit, I mean, they came out with an apology pretty much immediately, and then an update, and then an announcement that they were going to roll the interface back in a future version. So I think they've pretty much done what they can, everything they can right now to address the issue. And I don't know that it's enough, for a lot of people. Judging from the comments I'm reading, it hasn't been enough. But I think they'll roll it back, and people will just kind of forget about it and go on editing in Lightroom, which is sort of most photographers. It's almost my entire photography world now. Every once in a while I pop into Photoshop, or of course I do a lot of editing on my phone for publishing, for quickie publishing as well.
Yeah, and I think the other thing also is that everybody is being, well, I mean, there's a PC way to say it and a non-PC way to say it. We'll stick with the PC way, which I think people are generally overreacting before they go so negative. And what's so interesting to me is that, unlike any other company out there that I've worked with, Adobe is really good at making available a variety of resources. So if you have an issue with your software, there is a way to load prior versions. They make all their downloads available. They have, you're not locked in. So, rather than people saying how they're going to jump ship to Capture One, or they're going to ditch, their Creative Cloud membership, that same level of energy being, going into Google or going to the Adobe site and finding these support pages would solve their problem. I mean, it surely is an inconvenience. I will not shy away from that. And I also was not feeling super comfortable with the import screen, but at the same time, it's not the end of the world. And I knew that I could revert back to an older version if I had to. We'll include those links in the show notes as well. But I just found that just baffling to me.
Yeah, and I mean, I find them to be very accessible. Adobe is very responsive to how photographers feel, and I think perhaps the issue that people are really worried about is that if Adobe did it once, are they going to do it again with something else and maybe not roll back? So I mean, I agree. I think people could just have rolled back, and gone back to a version they're comfortable with. But I am reading a lot that, there's worry that this is an indicator that Adobe isn't supporting professionals or high-end users. And I don't think that's the case. They're clearly committed to those of us who use the software at a high level.
Yeah, it is interesting. I think they have a very delicate balance to keep. They've solidified themselves with the semi-pro and pro market with their marketing. And if they are looking to expand into more of the novice community of photographers, then, this certainly will not be the last time. But I think that this will be a lesson that they take to heart, and they will be much more cautious in how they introduce functionality and user interface for that audience while trying to keep the professional audience happy. I feel bad for everybody involved. I do know some of the people at Adobe, and I know that they've been, I think heartbroken is a good word to say in terms of how they have seen people react. But at the same time, I know my whole world is a world of other photographers, and to see them, like really bothered and inconvenienced is something to not take lightly, certainly. But at the same time, putting it in context, it's very much a first world problem.
Yeah, yes, it is. Yeah. Everyone who complained about Lightroom should feel fortunate.
Exactly. That's the worst thing that happened in their week,
Yeah.
given what's going on in the world.
But, I don't know if we want to get into this during this particular episode, but I mean, do you think there is desktop software that makes sense for normal people now? I mean, let's say you shoot primarily with an iPhone and maybe a point and shoot. I mean, it just doesn't feel like people are doing editing in a desktop environment anymore, aside from people like us.
Yeah, we'll go there. We'll go there.
All right.
Bring it. Yeah, I think this is kind of one of these interesting things. You are a new dad. I am a dad also. And, I know that you're really into Google Photos, and I'm really getting there. I think it's a great service. I've been really turned off again with Apple and iPhoto because it just seems like it's becoming more and more buggy. But, like as a dad, I'd say like 90% of my photos are my iPhone photos. And to your point, a lot of that editing is, done on the phone. I'm not doing that on my desktop. I think today, didn't you have an update about, that you had your real camera when photographing Mako?
Yeah, well, he's like my son was blurry in every picture I took today using an iPhone. But, all those pictures ended up online, and my wife, who's traveling right now, can load up Google Photos and see them immediately. I mean, I actually think Google Photos is, I think, brilliant by all accounts. And if they integrate something like a Nick editing suite, or something that's that's an acquisition of a web-based editor, it could be really powerful.
Yeah, definitely a next step. I mean, I've been waiting for the other foot to drop with a lot of the Nick software and its integration. I know a lot of the initial worry, this is another controversy a way back when, was whether the NIC acquisition was going to be the death knell for the desktop applications. And that hasn't happened. But yeah, I think my expectations as a dad photographer is very, very different. And like I think I mentioned that if it's the photo is not blurry and and I capture some eye contact or something, then I consider that a success. So the expectations are so much lower, and the functionality out there is more than enough for most people. So it's very interesting to me how those folks at Adobe who are trying to reach into this broader market feel that tying them into a professional level software solution is the way. For Photoshop, they always divided this previously with Photoshop, the full software suite, and then they had Photoshop Elements. And even to this day, they keep them separate. So I'm wondering, why would they not go that route with Lightroom?
Yeah, and Elements is enough for the vast majority of people out there. It seems pretty powerful. And yeah, it feels like there needs to be something. Basically, it's an iPhoto replacement. Most people I know who use iPhoto kind of get trapped into that world on the Mac. And then in Windows, I guess you use Picasa. That's what I kind of installed on my mom's machine before I just switched her wholesale over to Google Photos. But I used to use iPhoto basically as a synchronization path to my mobile devices. And it was just this thing that was sitting in between that I really disliked. I guess it's Photos now. And when Photos was released, it pretty much destroyed my iPhoto library. And so I just pointed Google Photos at the masters folder inside that iPhoto database package. And now everything's up in the cloud. It's great.
That is exactly my experience with iPhoto and now Apple Photos. I don't know what it is with Apple, but they just generation after generation of their software just has failed miserably. And this is the first time I've actually bailed as a result. It's actually pretty sad.
RIP.
We can include the sound effect. Wah, wah, wah. All right, so I think we've talked most everything we can about Lightroom, although I would say, I do have a question for you. How do you manage your Lightroom catalog backup? Because I'm thinking, like, even in a worst case scenario of Adobe Lightroom blew up one day because of an update,
yeah,
you still have your catalog. You can save your catalog as an independent catalog, and you can also just save it up as a non-independent backup. So what do you do with this?
Well, first of all, the Lightroom library seems pretty robust, and it's been impressive that when you do load a new version, there's not a lengthy upgrade process. They don't seem to be changing like the database schema regularly, which is great because that means you can roll back instead of complaining, or you submit your feedback in a productive way and then roll back. But a couple things about the library, after asking a bunch of folks online, I merged all of my libraries. I only had two, but because I had merged a few before, but each one was about 200,000 pictures. And so I have one library of about 400,000 pictures, and that does not include time-lapse pictures because I tend to put those in their own libraries. And it's been great. And I have to say, I've never used the built-in archiving of imagery in Lightroom, but I do allow it to back itself up to duplicate the catalog file. And I have an extremely complicated storage subsystem, which maybe we should go over in another episode. But I'm running ZFS, OpenZFS on the Mac, okay, which I love.
Yeah, we'll get into that more later.
Yeah, we can tap into it. But basically, it snapshots itself like every hour, so I can go back in time up to 6 months or something or longer, and I push those snapshots to a backup, and also most of my non-photo data is on the cloud somewhere, versioned in Dropbox. I've given up on cloud storage for all my stuff because I have 20-something terabytes, and it's just not easy to transfer that kind of data, even incrementally. So I'm unfortunately, I've gone back to manual backups, manual local backups, I should say, but they are versioned quite well, so I can go back in time arbitrarily. And I did that after I lost my Aperture library, which got corrupted in a really bizarre way. It's an ongoing corruption. So if I launch it now, I can watch it corrupt images one by one it just keeps going. And I had propagated that library to my backups over time because I didn't notice it was corrupting like that. So that was a huge disruption. I have I have bears in Hallow Bay, and they're keyworded by name, like the name of the bear is in there, and I can't get that data. So it's kind of tragic.
Yeah, those are just the nightmare stories that people dread.
Yeah. But also syncing to XMP. One of the reasons that I used Lightroom originally, I used to keep automatic sync to XMP on. I turned it off for performance reasons some time ago, but I should give it a try again. But I did as a test, sort of just open and create a new Lightroom library and import all my pictures, and all the metadata came in. The only thing I was missing were collections. And if you have plugins, the publish service stuff, you lose that. But that seemed like a pretty good backup. And unfortunately, I've lost. I'm no longer in the habit of saving out to that sidecar file.
Yeah, for me, the very simplistic overview is that I regularly save the catalog, and then I basically put the catalog up to Dropbox. And I also have several 100,000 files, and that is usually more than enough. And I usually keep a few different iterations of the backup in case something really bad happens. And for me, I gave up on the sidecar files long ago. And even though it takes more time on the import, I convert all of my images to DNG and have the original raw file saved within it. So it's definitely not friendly for storage space and whatnot, and I definitely go through more drives. But the benefit with that is that I can transfer the files between computers if I really had to. It saves all the metadata, saves some of the catalog information, kind of, sort of, for some of the stuff, but it's still not full. And if there's ever a failure, then it's much easier to restore things. And from my perspective, having the catalog saved off into the cloud, along with my tactic of having all my images saved off-site, it should be pretty easy to actually recreate what would otherwise be lost. So I don't want to prove that in full just yet, but it seems like it could theoretically work. And I think I've had one near catastrophe, and I was able to save things.
Actually, I have to. I mean, I actually do push to crash plan to the cloud, but I don't push my previews or my limited set of smart previews up. So I think having a cloud backup is definitely important. I'm actually amazed by how many people don't have multiple backups including to the cloud for things like things like catalog data. It's really important.
So I'm sure a lot of people are also curious, since we did tease them with it, was that we both were able to go to the launch party for the Light camera, or we'll say Light is the company, and the camera is the L16. And the big deal about this is that it's a computational photography camera, or hopefully I'm getting the words in the right order, but or shall we say, you have previous experience with Lightroom and also an interest in this camera. So what was your take with the L16 camera?
It was really interesting. I had, as part of due diligence for other companies in the past, I had seen in the past multiple camera, multiple sensor, multiple lens, computational photography cameras. There has to be a better word for it. I don't know. Maybe it hasn't. No one's come up with one yet. But the idea that you can use multiple focal lengths to do things like simulate. I mean, they all call it optical zoom, but it's not really optical zoom. It's discrete, and it uses computation to do things like simulate optical zoom, reduce noise, increase resolution, and things like that. And it seemed really great. I mean, for example, on drones, like this is something that, of course, I was doing most recently. But in gimbals, you don't want the center of mass to change as you do a zoom, as you optically zoom. And of course, the center of mass does change because, the cameras don't shift back and forth yet as the optical elements are moving. And so using something that's similar to the L16, maybe on a smaller scale, would be great in the air. So it's pretty impressive that you can take so many small sensors and cheap plastic lenses
So
and generate.
sorry to interrupt. I do realize that we should probably go over like the basics of what the L16 camera is, because the more I hear you talking, the more I realize like, there's some nuance to this that people should understand. So my interpretation of the L16 camera is that it is a camera in the sense that they're saying it's a computational camera, that there's a lot of calculation that's going on in the camera itself to take a lot of data from multiple lenses to give the impression that the camera can zoom in, zoom out, that the individual images from these different cameras can overlap and create a larger file. And the idea with this camera is that you would be able to use some kind of interface to edit the photo in the camera. So you could actively select the depth of field, whether you want a soft background and a sharp foreground, or you want clear focus all the way through, and potentially some other functionality. It's not quite 100% transparent yet about what it will or will not do. And from what I gathered through the Robert Scoble video that really kind of explained the most about the camera, strangely enough, it is built on Android. It will sync to Wi-Fi, and it supposedly has a focal length range between what was it, around 50 to 150 or 70 to 150?
35 to 150.
35.
And here's the Verge article. Actually, if you look at it, it's got a good picture of the light camera. So there are 16 sensors and lenses, cheap plastic lenses. And some of them are as long as 150 millimeter. And, of course, it's a fairly thin body. So they're using folded optics to get those 150 millimeter focal length lenses in there. And then, another thing that it does, which I think has been, I haven't actually seen it in any of these articles, but one of the ways it does capture high resolution is, if you're framing, for example, at 35 millimeters, at any given time, up to 10 elements fire, and that might be a 35 millimeter camera. That could also be four 70 millimeter cameras aimed at the 4 quadrants, for example. So they get that data. It has full coverage at 35, and it also has full coverage at 70 or 75 using the 150 millimeter sensors. So there's some amount of mirror moving inside. It's not just a bunch of forward-facing cameras flashing. So I think, the computational elements will be really interesting. A lot of the things that we saw that light field cameras could do, like the Lightroom cameras, can also be done here, like refocus. But I think, fundamentally there's going to be some element of using depth to do some of the computational elements. And depth, this is where I think they're going to need that whole year coming up before the camera ships, or less than a year, but almost a year.
So it's supposed to release in June of 2016. They're taking pre-orders now. The thing that I find really fascinating about the computational camera movement is that it seems like it's inevitable. I think that it provides a great deal of value, but not unlike Google Glass, their form factor is really important. And Lightroom seemed to stumble because they required an external software editing suite, and they had limited output options. And it's not exactly apples to apples, but they fall within the computational photography circle category.
Yeah.
And I think it's just a matter of time. I just wonder, is Light the company that actually has the breakthrough, or are they going to stumble? I am optimistic and hoping that they succeed. I hope that somebody succeeds, because I think that the functionality is just too cool to not have succeed.
Well, and I think the key will be that there needs to be a bridge to the technology, which is basically compatibility with traditional files. Traditional pictures that you can share instantly to anywhere on the web. Without that, and I think that was one of the areas in which Lightroom was pretty resistant in doing, because they wanted to they wanted to focus on the interactivity of the images. But, we look at 2D screens, that's just a fact. And people's attention spans are like half a second for a picture as they scroll by, so you really do need to be able to take a picture with this camera and use that picture immediately. Now, if you're serious about processing the photo and doing something more interesting, of course, I think in post, you can go work on the image, but most of the images should just come out as being pictures. And it seems like the company is committed to that. I also think there's a lot of potential if they can do it seamlessly in integrating with smartphones. So they have indicated that they have a contract with Foxconn, and then they do have licensing rights potentially for a mobile device that's a phone as well. So that could be really interesting. I think the single device thing is the issue that I think is the most important. Most people shoot with their phones not because they like shooting with phones, but it's what's in their pocket and it's what they have. So I do think that the having a phone form factor doesn't necessarily follow from watching people use cameras in phones. It's really a second device issue that we're talking about in terms of success of a camera, standalone camera.
Yeah, and to me, it's striking that it seems like, as we mentioned with the Adobe issue, it's not just software; it's camera makers are trying to go downstream to the broader audience of novice photographers. And is the L16 camera that device? I don't know, but it seems like the gigantic, just the giant in the market right now is the iPhone. And if you can't overcome the iPhone, then you end up being a niche player. So I really am wondering, how is Light going to manage that? And more importantly, how are they going to manage user expectation? I have no idea how they're going to tackle that. I know it was an issue for Lytro as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the $64,000 question. Like, what? How are they going to manage that? And are people willing to dump their iPhone?
Well, I don't think they can dump their iPhone or their Android device because they're always going to have it. So this, it's really is it high enough quality that you will say, okay, hold on, baby, let me go in my bag and get, or my jacket pocket or something and get the second camera out. Now I shoot with a normal camera a lot, non-iPhone camera, and I'm willing to haul it around. But I think about the ways that I use it, and I use it like I would any serious camera, which is that I have physical controls and I know where they are and I can change settings instantly without thinking, because there are 3 dials, one for each exposure compensation variable. And so if I'm using the viewfinder, I can use the device without looking at it. And I think touch interfaces are challenging for anyone who shoots at a high level because we're used to reacting quickly and trying to nail the shot. And maybe you have to do less with a camera like the Light, in that you may not have to be precise with focus, for example, or focus at all.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see what the overall benefits are of the camera for the average user. If it pretty much guarantees that my camera is not going to misfocus and there's no lag and I can get a quick photo, then it certainly would be a viable alternative that maybe I do want to keep on my person rather than the iPhone. But the iPhone has this advantage, which is people want to be able to text and email and share right away. And the L16, while it has Wi-Fi capabilities, which is great, I wish freaking all the camera manufacturers would adopt this finally, since we're an internet society at this point. They do a sync, but I don't know that that's necessarily a share right away, because I haven't had my hands on it. And what they had at the announcement party was roped off prototypes that you really couldn't interact with it yet. So there's a lot of questions.
Yeah, I'm actually amazed by how many photographers ordered it. I mean, it's definitely an interesting camera, and the tech, I'm glad that people are pushing, that Light is out pushing this, shaking up the industry like this. But there's very little information about what the camera is and what it does. In fact, there's almost no information, and their videos don't have any information. Maybe the Scopal video has the most. because
It
Scoble asks
seems
questions nonstop. So,
and Robert gets a lot of credit in my book. He really pushed for more information. He was able to get it, and I think that helped them quite a bit, because their video was very generic. It was a lot of close-ups of people using the camera and having fun with it, but there was little to no technical information or information about what the interface ultimately looks like. And that's probably because they're still building it, and I
right.
give them some leeway. But it certainly is riding very high on hype and momentum, and just early adopters being very eager to see a computational photography camera actually working.
Yeah, and I have to say that some of my friends who are not, they're not really gearheads. They just care about the picture. They couldn't be more excited, about a camera like this, because they don't care what the camera looks like, and they want resolution. If they're calling it a 52 megapixel camera, and even in a year, I think people aren't going to necessarily want. I think most people won't be able to deal with 52 megapixels. And the pictures will probably look excellent at 20 megapixels, even if there are artifacts. Because I came from a light field background, I'm really interested in what will happen with translucency and specular highlights, and anything that doesn't have any data or has multiple depth points that need to be factored into play when you're doing all the computation. So I'm super excited to track what happens with the camera, and think rooting for them.
So for our non-technical audience, what do you mean by transparency?
Or translucency? Really, it's
Translucency, excuse me.
yeah. So light field camera, any camera that can capture and change depth of field and focus, it needs to know where things are in space, right? So if I take a picture of what I'm seeing here, it needs to know that the monitor's here, and they tend to have problems when a particular pixel can be in more than one place, like in a translucent environment, or let's say you have glass that's hazy, glass or mirror that's hazy. That pixel actually, has information at that plane, but also in the reflection, or, what's beyond it. And those are kind of hell scenarios. I think they're the sorts of things that, with enough research, could be overcome, but could also take a lot of processing time. So there will definitely be a trade-off in processing time versus image quality. And it seems like Light is doing the right things. I know there's going to be a balance there. The more they pre-process in the camera, the more useful the images are immediately. And so that, they're going to have to sort of balance what people want to do immediately with the picture and what they're willing to do in post.
Yeah, maybe some foreshadowing. We'll talk more about a little bit more about the megapixel race versus what people actually use all these megapixels for in the end, and whether that's a viable and smart investment. Because in the end, a 52 megapixel camera, as a bit of a precursor to this, is, most people still share stuff on the web. So how important is 52 megapixels in the end?
Right. And, even if you go back to Lightroom days, I did an experiment where I shot with the Lightroom camera a lot, and then posted all those pictures on Instagram, which at the time was 640 pixels. Plenty, Lightroom has plenty of pixels actually for 640 by 640, and no one could tell.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we have talked ourselves out for the most part on these two topics. What I would say is we are going to have a website up for all things photo in a short time. If you want to, until the website is up and you want to submit questions or get clarification, email feedback@allthingsphoto.com, and throw Eric or I a question on social media. We'll have links somewhere, but everything that I do online is under Jim Goldstein. And Eric, how can people find you?
I am at Cheng, ECHENG on Twitter, and Cheng Photo, ECHENG photo.com.
All right, awesome. All right, well, that wraps it. We hope that everybody dealing with the Adobe issues finds inner peace, and everybody at Adobe is able to recover and have a good vacation at some point in the future. And everybody at Light Camera, keep up the good work. Thank you, Eric.
Absolutely.
It's been fun.
Thank you.